Welcome back to the 𝗀𝗚 Podcast, tzvi broker with Rebbe Gerzi, and it's been some time. But Baruch Hashem, we are super excited to be here together with you as we have our inaugural launch of season 2 of the 𝗀𝗚 Podcast. So what are you going to speak about here today? I think we have a lot of people that have been nudging, seeing people on the street, giving me stares. When's that podcast going to start up again? And the truth is, we have been on break. For those of you that have been attentive weekly listeners to our podcast, the last podcast that we offered was shortly before Pesach, and we've been speaking about how we really want to get out there back on the air to be able to continue our conversation with a fresh new angle that we're going to discuss about today. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about why we haven't been back so soon and what we've been busy with here at 𝗀𝗚.
So Chesed Hashem, we've been in the midst of fulfilling a vision that we started a couple of years ago. And that was to work to produce healthy, engaging information in 4 specific areas, which we call the 𝗟𝗡𝗧. So the first 𝗧 is physical and financial health. The second 𝗧 is that of relationships. The third 𝗧 is that of the mind and wisdom. And the fourth 𝗧 is what we call having a mentorship, and 𝗀𝗚cie, spirituality. And within the 𝗟𝗡𝗧, there was always a goal to work on producing a situation where there would be a director, Rabbi Tzvi Broker, director of 𝗀𝗚. He's also the gamification director for Pilzno. So we have our director, Baruch Hashem, and we started with our 𝗧h𝗛𝗧 Torah, having a divrei Torah each week around the subject of parnasa, of work, moving into Baruch Hashem, our first season of podcasts. And then from our podcasts, our goal, and really the goal still is to produce a chabura style or beis hamedrash style, an in-depth learning style get-together to really excavate fundamentals of the 𝗟𝗡𝗧. So what that looks like is that we have this general 𝗧 of work, parnasa. But then all of the questions that do not tend to be asked about parnasa, about our relationship with the physical world, about our relationship with money. Do we like money? Do we not like money? And the goal was to create some sort of more in-depth learning, looking at the makoros, having a syllabus, a curriculum, and together excavating these very sometimes profound and deep ideas that we are for sure not used to, and allowed to have the space for us to grow, to change our mindset, to make shifts in the way that we are relating to that particular 𝗧. So Chesed Hashem, we launched after Pesach.
It's been an amazing ride, and really what Rebbe just described, taking steps towards this vision of upgrading the way that Yidden live in these 4 essential areas of living that often aren't paid attention to,
taken for granted.
Even though they're really the fabric and the glue of what enables us to function the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to function. And since Pesach, we've had the opportunity through this chabura to have a platform for chevra, and some of our podcast listening chevra as well have joined, who realized that the discussions that we had in episode 1 are really big questions. And the question is, how am I able to take that and make that shift in the way I show up at work, in the way that I spend my money, in the way I make my financial decisions, the way I view myself as somebody who's involved in work, and everything that comes along with that. And it's really been an amazing opportunity to get together with professionals from all different backgrounds, across different continents, being able to have discussions, look at Mara Makomas, and Baruch Hashem, it's kept us busy.
And do the internal work.
Yeah, of
so
course.
One feature is that we sometimes are so used to listening to a share. We listen to a share, and where do you fit in? Where do you fit in? So you've got discussion, but we do our Vedas, and it's very beautiful to see. We've done chaburas. I've done 20 odd years. We've been doing chaburas, and we've done chaburas, 𝗀𝗚 chaburas. But first of all, it's very wonderful working with Reb Tzvi. And the reason why it's very wonderful for so many levels, but to have somebody who else is interested in something interesting that I'm interested in. So let me rephrase that sentence. To have somebody who's interested in what I'm interested in. So when I would speak about Parnasa and realizing that this 𝗀𝗘liche of Torah is really not excavated, and more than that, there's such a pagam on people's thinking. So somebody will say something negative about money or Parnasa, and I'll say to them, Mom, doesn't that go against this particular Maimah Chazal? What do you mean? And I'll show them the Maimah Chazal, and they'll be, oh, I skimmed past that. I didn't realize. Or the way people would, actually no, 𝗧h𝗧 Parnasa is a bracha. Really? Or poverty, you show Maimah Chazal, poverty is death, equates to death. What? Really? And some people choose to believe that poverty is the only way forward. If you want to be spiritual, you have to live in poverty. And it's not necessarily the most accurate truth. And when you show people a Maimah Chazal, you show something inside, not just made up material, but you take a Mar Makom, you read it out, you explain it, you could talk about it, and then you journal, and you can give yourself, with no mafarshim, give yourself time to process. Where am I within this? And to do this with you, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I hope with all of each 𝗀𝗧his, physical health will have the same, each of these 𝗀𝗏 will have the same.
Be'ezus Hashem, that's definitely the vision, and really it's not just this with Rav Gerzi and myself, but really what's an amazing opportunity is that together with this group of the Bnei Chabura, really being able to excavate this topic and to be able to learn it through the prism of each person's experience, each person coming from a different background, cultural background, a different level of Torah background, a different professional background. Chasdei Hashem, it's a big bracha. It's amazing to see it taking place, and it's been keeping us busy. But at the same time, we've been speaking about the fact that while the Chabura is really the platform that allows Bnei Torah and Bnei Aliyah to really grow in this area, the podcast is super important because the podcast is where we're able to open up discussions for a wider audience. And what we're looking to do, Be'ezus Hashem, in this episode too, we're going to continue to talk about fundamental questions that we didn't yet address, things that come up, particularly trying to pay attention to issues that are coming up in our times, certain challenges that we're facing with current events, AI, other things as well that are questions are being asked in the workplace, and allowing this podcast to be the platform to be able to discuss it through the vision and through the eyes of the Torah. But what we wanted to do to add as well to this season, and this as well was always our vision, was always the vision of what we wanted to do with the podcast. And Baruch Hashem, we've seen from the feedback that we've been getting from listeners and for those that have heard about what we're doing, right, is to be able to bring on guests onto the podcast, to be able to enrich the experience for all of our listeners. And Be'ezus Hashem, what we're going to be doing is bringing on, first and foremost, guests that are experts in different areas, whether it be areas of psychology, areas of personal growth, areas of finance, right? Different topics that we've been speaking about and will speak about, to be able to hear from their perspectives and have discussions together to be able to enrich the experience. And the second type of guest that we're going to be bringing on in season 2 are really those listeners that have become work inspired. And what that means to become work inspired, we spoke about this in season number 1, the difference between just somebody who's heard of an idea and somebody who's really living it, really living the vision, is somebody that through their own professional experience has been able to take the principles that we've spoken about, and they're doing it and they're living it. And we want you, our listeners, to be able to meet and to be able to hear perspectives of people that are working across different professions, right, from the handyman to the lawyer, right, to the person in marketing, right, to the person who's working in finance, right, to the person who's the accountant, to the painter. So to be able to have access of seeing how a person is able to actually live in this way, that's something which is really a personal vision of mine. I know we've discussed it for a while, and Baruch Hashem, we're at the point right now that we're able to bring this out in season number 2. So what we'd like to do here in this intro of season number 2 is really, I wanted to share a Mar Makom, that I know that when I saw this Mar Makom, right, I was like, wow, this is describing beautifully that which we discuss all the time, of really the vision that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for us when it comes to being work inspired. And this Mar Makom is found very fascinating, right? In 𝗀𝗃 and Rebbe Eliezer, right? Because in 𝗀𝗃 and Rebbe Eliezer, what's shared with us is a very intimate story about one of the 𝗀𝗘𝗧 𝗦 that we have no hasaga of, Rav Eliezer ben Horkanos, right? Where when we think about who Rav Eliezer ben Horkanos is, Rebbe Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗧, the Rebbe of Rebbe Akiva, right? The 𝗀𝗏 of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, what's spoken about him, I'm saying in Pirkei Avos, where you think, where did he start? He probably started, in some sort of type of super yeshiva, top Talmud, elitist.
Knew everything.
He made it there eventually. He made it there eventually to Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, and then he mamish pushed himself, fascinating story that he smelled his breath, what was going on over there. But where did he start? And 𝗀𝗃 and Rebbe Eliezer tells that story. It's not a shame to tell the story of where he started. But so where did he start? Maybe Rebbe, tell a little bit of the story of where he came from. I'm going to bring up over here.
You tell the story. You could go. Let's go for it. Okay. Let's go. No, there's nothing like reading inside.
נחום, just as long as my computer tech friend cooperates with me. Okay. Baruch Hashem. Okay. So in Rebbe Eliezer, in 𝗀𝗃 Rebbe Eliezer, Perek Aleph, tells us a story about Rav Eliezer ben Horkanos, right, who his father was one of the wealthiest Yidden of the time. And his father owned many fields. And he gave him fields to be able to work. So it tells us over here, right, that Rav Eliezer ben Horkanos shayu la'avav chorshin b'hayu chorshin al-gabei ha'ma'anet, right, 𝗬𝗀𝗃𝗧 b'tarshin 𝗧𝗛𝗏 𝗬𝗀𝗏. So what happened was that, like what happens a lot today, but for a totally different reason, that people were upset and sad and frustrated at work. His father basically saw him crying and totally stressed out. So he goes to him, why are you crying?
You're sitting on a rock,
having
crying,
not being productive. So he thought, of course, Shema mitzdaret, maybe you're upset because of the job I gave you, right? Maybe the job that I gave you, the task that I gave you, right, is too difficult for you. So he gives them another task, and then he finds them crying, and another task, and he finds him crying, right? Until finally, what happens, right, goes on to explain that he says, okay, I'll tell you, the reason why I'm crying is because I want to learn Torah. Right? Story goes to learn Torah, and he becomes Rebbe Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗧. So the Radal, which is, we have over here, the parish, right, the parish of Rebbe Eliezer, in 𝗀𝗃 of Rebbe Eliezer, says something. It's a long piece. We're not going to be able to read the whole piece, but he says something which is mind-blowing. And what he shares is that, why is it, right, that he cried, and why did that crying make a difference? What role did that play in the formulation of Rebbe Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗧? And what he explains is that he says, just find the words over here. He says, "Ein safek 𝗀𝗃𝗧 gam mikoydem 𝗪 𝗪𝗪𝗪 b'levavoi." Right, so he says that, of course, we're speaking about Rebbe Eliezer ben Horkanos. We're not speaking about somebody over here that he didn't care about 𝗀𝗃𝗧 before. 𝗪s v'shalom, he did. He says, "Ela shelo haya sipuk biyado lehoitzi leor ritzoyne hatayv." But he wasn't successful in being able to come to that satisfaction, feeling that satisfaction in his learning, right? To be able to bring out, right, this light, this ratzon hatov, this good desire that he had. Ki ad shahaya ben 𝗀𝗃 shana. He says, because we see he was 28 years old at this point, right? He wasn't 17, 18. He was already 28 years old at this point within the story, and he wasn't matzliach. V'lechein chashash gamkein pen lo titzlach. Oid biyado lilmoid. And he was, internally, what was going on was that he feared that he's not going to be matzliach in that which he did. He was almost at the point of being messiah, of giving up. Ach m'malachtoi halazu shahaya choresh v'his ben loi Hashem lachroish b'tarshin b'makom avanim kashim. But he says that because through his work, through that experience that he had in his job, where he felt 𝗀𝗃𝗧, he saw 𝗀𝗃𝗧 brought to him that he had to not just plow, but he had to work in a place b'makom avanim kashim, right? That he had to work in a place which was difficult to plow. Shekol yom yachosh achoresh b'roiv amal or the fetach l'shaded ad masai, right? Behen lasseis makam lezorea lezera veholida vetzmicha lechem leoichel. And he saw over here that through this experience that he saw, he was working on a place which is very difficult to be able to work on in order to be able to plow. And that he saw that through working through this and pushing himself through the situation, he was able to be able to bring out and grow something from it. So I'm skipping a few lines. He says, 𝗬𝗓 Rebbe Eliezer ledun. He was able to make a 𝗀𝗃𝗃 for himself. 𝗬divrei Torah 𝗀𝗃 𝗀𝗃 sagur lev even b'kirbo l'zrav l'tzmiach boi tzemech tzadik. 𝗬𝗓𝗃 So he says, Rebbe Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗃 said, if that's what can take place over here within my work, he saw from the experience of what he was doing, he said, even more so, does Torah, which we're told, Chazal tell us, which is something which is hard as iron, has the ability to be able to break through and to penetrate right into my heart, and I can be matzliach in my limud. And that's why he cried. He cried because he saw that through the work that he was doing, he had an insight. He learned from that situation and had an insight of how he can be matzliach in Torah. It sounds very familiar to who? It sounds very familiar to Rebbe Akiva. And the Radal speaks about it. Rebbe Akiva was the Talmud of Rebbe Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗃, and Rebbe Akiva had a similar situation. He goes on to explain, which gives us a context of perhaps how Rebbe Akiva was mushba. Right, that his Rebbe had a similar experience. Rebbe Akiva had that experience. But here's the key line that we want to read. As Hashem, it's 𝗀𝗃𝗃 for everyone to get a hold of a Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer and to read this whole Radal. But it speaks of Rebbe Akiva as well. But this is a line that we really wanted to bring out. So he says that this should be a dugma, that this should be an example. 𝗀𝗃𝗃 b'melachto, for each person in their work, 𝗧𝗛𝗏, that he works in 𝗬𝗏 b'matchunasam kamohem, that we should follow in the ways of Rebbe Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗃 and Rebbe Akiva. L'sboinen likach lev me'inyan esek melachtam ba'atzma lahavas Torah v'yirah shemayim. That through the work that we're going through, whatever the job is, whatever job that you do, that through the work experiences that you have, they are able to learn, and you're able to grow, and you're able to transform yourself and apply that to your Torah and avodas Hashem. Beautiful words. He's not saying that despite the fact that we're at work, that you should find a way to learn Torah on your lunch break so you can grow in Avos Hashem. He's saying that through your work, we learn from Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗃 and from Rebbe Akiva, that it's through one's work that we can transform ourselves. And this Be'ezus Hashem, are the types of people that we're going to be able to meet. People that aren't just excited about Torah, not just excited about Tefillah, and do it in their spare time. That they do it even though they're working. Be'ezus Hashem, we're going to be meeting people in all different professions that have been able to understand these principles that we've been speaking about in our podcast, and have been living these principles, and to be able to learn from them.
Beautiful. Very, very exciting. What a beautiful piece. I remember the first time I read this piece, I was so moved. I remember I learned it many years ago with Reb Chuna Halpin. So moved. Like it's such a, it's very real. Very, very real. Very, Rebbe Akiva. Rebbe Akiva had as well, maybe that's what drew him to his Rebbe. Association. Nu Baruch Shem Shkayach.
Yeah, and this was so powerful. That this is what the Radal is telling us, that we want to say, what can I learn from Eliezer 𝗀𝗃𝗃? What can I learn from Rebbe Akiva? There's many things we can learn from them. But what he's saying over here is that this is one thing that we can learn from them, that each one can take it to heart. Each one can take it to heart. And it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing if you're able to live this way. And this is really the vision of Work Inspired. Right? This is the vision, and this is what we're building in the Chabura together. Right? For those that are fortunate, right, to be part of the Chabura, right, to really change the way that we experience our involvement in work, and change the way that we experience our involvement in money, so that therefore the experience itself is something that becomes part of Avodas Hashem. And for so many people, that's such a foreign concept.
Yes.
And for so many people, that's just like, well, what do you mean? Like, what is marketing, and what is AI, and what does gardening have to do with avodas Hashem? Like, what does that have to do with avodas Hashem? Like, okay, there's the halachas. I need to follow the halachas in that which I do, of course. But what does that have to do with becoming a great person? And here we find Rebbe Eliezer, Horkanos and Rebbe Akiva, that was dafka through that changed.
And it was important enough that it found its way at the Hakdama of the Sefer.
Yeah, that's the Hakdama of the Sefer. And I think the message is a very clear one, and it's touched me, and Rebbe, you shared that it touched you, and Baruch Hashem, it's very empowering to know that there are people and that there are Yidden out there that are Hashem shlichim in all different areas of Parnasa that are living this way.
Baruch
And
Hashem.
Hashem, really the walk away, for us here in this introduction, right, is to recognize that think big, don't think small. It's not about surviving the fact that I'm involved in money. It's not about I'm surviving the fact that I spend X amount of hours doing my work. I'm somehow managing to stay away from averos. I'm somehow managing to learn a little bit. But what can I do? Baruch Hashem for Shabbos, I'm able to survive. I'm able to get epis, a little bit of what it means to be a Yid. Think big. Kadosh Baruch Hu believes in us. Kadosh Baruch Hu believes in us. The Torah is big. And to be a Yid is big. And Be'ezus Hashem, we're looking forward, right, together to continuing these discussions amongst ourselves, amongst Chevra. And once again, as last season, it's amazing to be able to get feedback, to reach out to us, right, and to let us know, right, thoughts and questions that are coming up. And Be'ezus Hashem, together as a collective group of Yidden that are being 𝗧his in every aspect of our lives, right, l'shma. Be'ezus Hashem will be able to upgrade our experience, to be able to not just inspire ourselves, but Be'ezus Hashem to even inspire others.
Amen. Bracha, mazel, and hatzlacha.